I really don't understand how or why Night Watch by Jayne Phillips won this year's Pulitzer Prize for fiction because I've just finished reading this novel and I am baffled and disappointed and annoyed. I'm actually actively annoyed by this novel, which doesn't happen very often because I tend to be quite positive when I'm reading fiction. But to me, this novel feels like a mashup of Wuthering Heights and the novel Rebecca, but transposed to the end and the aftermath of the American Civil War. And its characters and storyline and plot don't just feel melodramatic to me, but more like a soap opera. I mean, if you think of the what happens in this book and the way the storylines come together, it feels really soap opera-ish. And maybe I am just being way too critical of this book because I read it having known that it's won this major literary award, but I feel like I went into it with quite an open mind. So I was really interested in what was going to win the Pulitzer Prize this year, and I made a whole video discussing books that I was hoping were going to win. And then when this was announced as the winner, I was completely surprised because I had never heard of this novel before. I think especially here in the UK, this novel just hasn't been known very much. I mean, it was reviewed and covered, but really not talked about or read very much. And I think the same is kind of in the US, and with people I follow who also follow the Pulitzer Prize and who had read this when the announcement was made, they were quite confused by it winning the prize as well. But even so, I went into it with an open mind and was really eager to explore this book because I was aware of Jayne Phillips. She's quite a respected writer. This is her sixth novel, I think, and so yeah, really interested to read a book by her. And so a couple days after the announcement was made, I wasn't able to get to a bookshop until that time, but when I did, this had actually sold out of the London bookshops that I went to. So I guess a lot of other people were really interested to read it as well. But then another couple days later, I was able to finally go and buy a copy of this book and dove right into it because I was really eager to read it. But now, yeah, I don't understand why this is considered prize-worthy, and I feel like it's kind of failing in what it's intending to do. So the story, it centers around primarily, there's several main characters, but it primarily centers around two characters of a mother, Eliza, and her daughter, Connolly. And we see at the very beginning of the novel, they are taken by the sinister figure known as Papa, who is referred to as Papa, but we learn very quickly that he's not actually Connolly's father and not Eliza's husband, but they are taken to a lunatic asylum in West Virginia in the year 1874, and the events of this novel move back and forth between the years 1874 and 1864, so right at the end of the American Civil War, and this was a real lunatic asylum in West Virginia, and so it's taking this historical place and some historical figures and incorporating them into the plot of the story, and we follow how they came to this point and the events afterwards. And and there's so much in this story of the kind of melodrama of like double names and very like dramatic coincidences and incidents which create this story, and I'm not opposed to that of kind of like melodrama as like style of writing, because I feel like it can, if used in the right way, it can convey some meaning and an impact in different ways. But the way that this novel employs that was more often just felt a bit hokey and kind of like obvious how things come together, and so the pretty much all of the characters like have double names in this story and go under different names, but some of it felt like quite unnecessary. Like when they first go to the lunatic asylum, they have to pretend not to be mother and daughter and have assumed in different names, and I feel like it's never totally explained like why that is like absolutely necessary. I mean, I guess maybe to get it admitted to the place, but it's like I don't think it's a spoiler to like say that it's like they eventually reveal who they really are to the staff, and the response of the staff is kind of like, yeah, okay, and so it's like, why were they pretending not to be mother and daughter? Why was the daughter pretending to be her nurse rather than, and like going under these different names, which under the mother's fragile mental condition, you would think that having to remember that her daughter is not her daughter in this institution and she's supposed to call her something else, you would think that would like add to her sense of stress and to her declining mental condition, and this institution and place, it's kind of seen as a refuge, and there are some quite fearsome characters there, but on the whole, people are treated quite well, and so we follow the mother's gradual recovery and how she gets better over time. But I feel like this isn't necessarily like, I don't really understand how this institution, I understand that these are, and many of the inmates at this institution, maybe it's not right to refer to them as inmates, patients that are at this institution. They've experienced a lot of trauma, both witnessing horrible things and things which have happened to them, which have led or exasperated their mental degradation and led them to not be able to function in the world. And quite understandably, in the aftermath of war, there's so much trauma, and a lot of people, many who weren't directly involved or didn't even necessarily feel strongly to be on one side or other of the conflict, they are still the casualties of this war. And I feel like that's partly what Jayne and Phillips is trying to portray in this novel of people on the margins. So this family in particular, they lived in a mountainous region of Virginia, and so kind of like removed from the conflict as a whole. And Connolly, she's an adolescent, she's only 12 years old, and so doesn't have too much like memory or experience of the war, except in the way that it's devastated the landscape and the communities around her. And she remarks on that at one point, and that is like quite poignant how that is pointed out. But this as an institution where people recover and get better and on the whole are treated fairly well. Of course, there are incidents in history of both like institutions and individuals like the doctor in this, who are really well-meaning and who try to help bring communities back together and restore people to health again. And of course, there's examples of this, and it's wonderful that that this happened. But as like a representative of this time period and a way of understanding this historical period, I don't really understand what this is really like telling us about this, because they basically go to this institution and by and large like have a fairly good time and just like gradually like recover over time. And so yeah, I don't really understand what that, there's a whole thing about going on like carriage rides as well, which you can see represented on the cover of this novel of it seems like this great aspiration to go on carriage rides, and Connolly like wants to go on a carriage ride at one point, and it's seen as part of like a part of the therapeutic treatment, I guess, of like recovery and a kind of like civilized thing to do. But trying to like imagine the actual practicalities of it, of going in this of this little box, and that's being driven by horses over what I assume isn't completely smooth road. I assume that it's like quite jostling, and so I personally I can't imagine like anything more like unpleasant than like going on a carriage ride and sort of being jostled around for a while, and then like going back to the institution, and that's a very like minor quibble and point, but yeah, I don't really like understand the significance of that, or why that was a detail in the book. And the novel goes to quite a lot of pains to show the workings of this institution. So it's reproduced on the salaries of all of the people that work there, and it really tries to reproduce this historical period through like photos as well. So there are photos of the institution and the towns and the whole region, so I feel like she's trying to introduce the real history of this into this fictional story. But I feel like I'm still left with so many questions about like how this institution operates. Like, is it completely state funded? Because it is like quite plush conditions and quite like a grand. I mean, I think this is an actual like representation of what this institution looked like. It's quite a big, grand place, and obviously required like quite a big staff, and so a lot of funding, and so that a lot of the patients there were treated really well is like fantastic, and obviously really aided to their recovery. But my issue is I don't really I'm not an expert on mental institutions of the 19th century, but I assume this isn't the norm of the time, and I assume most institutions where people who were dubbed insane went to, or having very bad mental difficulties were kind of placed in. I assume a lot of these institutions were actually quite harmful and had quite like bad conditions in them, and it's quite a like coincidence actually that Joyce Carol Oates is just bringing out a novel called Butcher, which also takes place in a mental institution in the 19th century, and but follows a doctor that is much more sinister in his approach to his care for his patients. I don't know if you can tell that by the cover of this novel. Yeah, it's quite obvious that she takes quite a different approach to this, but is also using a real historical example of a doctor that was really unscrupulous in how he cared for his patients at the time. So I don't understand how this institution, what this reveals to us about the history of it. But to get back to the story itself, so there's not just the mother and daughter character, but there's also this character called Papa, who is a former Confederate soldier, who's an opportunist and a scoundrel, and not just a scoundrel, that's like a light way of putting it. He's a really horrible, monstrous man who's a rapist, and there is, as many people who have read this book have remarked, there is a really extended and horrible rape sequence in this novel. And reading that, I'm not opposed to violence in literature, and if it serves a purpose. But I'm not really sure I understand the purpose of having this really extended and detailed and graphic scene in the novel, of what it tells us about it, because it again, just like I was left with more like questions about it, because I mean, I guess maybe she was showing this scene, and this really horrible scene to show the impact of not just the physical and sexual violation that Eliza experienced, but also the mental trauma, because she wasn't just physically violated in this way, she was also humiliated and really mentally beaten down, and so this either I guess either led to or exasperated her mental condition, which deteriorates and obviously went on for years because she lives with this man who just intrudes upon her property and her kind of refuge in this mountainous region. And after her partner had left to go to fight in the Civil War, and then they didn't hear from him again, and he just disappeared. And there's a whole mystery around that, and we do follow some sections from his point of view and what he went through. But so I guess that's what the violence of this scene is showing, of to try to give the real impact of this, and to think if she had experienced this for years, then yeah, it would completely mentally and physically destroy her and grind her down over time. But I was kind of left with more like questions of like, but why I know she is like physically bound at some points, and but there's also a scene that a really harrowing scene where she and uses her daughter of Connolly to try to retrieve a gun to fight off this invader of this man who calls himself Papa, who invaded, but she's not able to use that gun, I guess, to fight him off, and I was just left like questioning why she wasn't able to escape him at any point, even though she was physically bound at some point. But if this went on for years, and also the family had a kind of protector in a character called Dirbla, who is another character, kind of like motherly figure for Eliza, and the man that she had Connolly with, and but is also a kind of local like legend, kind of Irish healer who had previously resided on a plantation, a slave plantation, she is this character that is kind of in the background, who really cares about Eliza, and who does in the plot intervene in to help her and to stop Papa, but she feels like quite a strong character, and I don't understand why she didn't more like physically intervene with this man who was keeping Eliza and her daughter and the subsequent children that he fathers with her. Why didn't she more physically intervene in sometime in those like years that went by, and the characters as a whole, like I thought Connolly and Eliza were both really interesting characters that I did sort of care about over time, but I felt especially with Dirbla, she didn't feel like a believable character to me, and she's a character with like this kind of eccentric person that lives on the margins of this community is a character that I would normally sympathize with and really be interested in and care about, but I feel like she just like served the plot in this novel to move it forward, and so whenever her scenes came on, I felt like we weren't really getting her like a authentic story. It was more just like as a way of leading up to the different like plot lines coming together in this story. And then there's also Connolly's actual father, the soldier who is very severely wounded, and there's a scene in it which I feel like is really effective, where he is at war and he's wounded really horribly, and then has a really difficult period of recovery. And I thought that was really well written and really well described, but then how he enters into the whole plot of the story, I just felt was a bit ridiculous, and was another one of these like really like massive coincidences that like really that would happen. And then the way that the story all comes together at the end and the way that it concludes, I'm not going to give any spoilers about that, but I found it really not just unsatisfactory, but disappointing and a bit ridiculous of just the way it all comes together and the way it concludes and the way it like goes into even characters of that are kind of like on the sides of the children that she had together with this horrible man, and that re-enter the story, and it's like, but I don't know anything about these characters and or the main characters' relationships to them, and which they haven't really been able to have. But it's just it just all felt a bit too ridiculous. And there's also a character, probably the other primary character in this story, is called Weed, who's an orphan boy who resides at this asylum, kind of on the margins, and had the potential to be a really interesting character. Like there's a kind of interesting things to do with his like gender fluidity and his mysterious background and him as a person and his personality as this figure kind of like on the sidelines that's just like observing a lot of these things. But I felt like that wasn't really developed, or his character, so that I didn't really I couldn't really feel for him too much, and the relationship that he develops with Connolly as their friendship and connection with each other, I just didn't really buy into. I didn't feel like it was like developed enough. So it felt like she was maybe like trying to handle like too many characters in this story, or that the characters were just created to serve the plot and to bring the plot all together in this way. But at the same time, I don't feel like this revealed anything about this historical period, which feels like a failure, because I think that that's what Jayne and Phillips was trying to do in this book. So when I was trying to go and research and read and understand like why is this novel considered so good, and I read a number of reviews, and reviews of it from a lot of major publications are quite polarized. There are some that are very positive, and so I like really read carefully some of the positive reviews, because I thought maybe they could reveal like what was the big deal about this novel. But I was more just like shaking my head and like, no, I don't agree with that. And then there were some quite negative reviews as well, and very critical reviews of it, and I kind of understand that more. And there was also this interview with Jayne and Phillips in Publishers Weekly, where Phillips says that she wants the reader to understand the history of another time, to appreciate it, and the best way to understand, she says, is fiction. I want to write scenes where the reader can feel the shattering moments. And so in that way, I just feel like this novel didn't accomplish that for me. I don't feel like I have a better understanding or feeling for the American Civil War, the end of it, the casualties that resulted from it in its aftermath, because it's all wrapped up in this highly melodramatic plot where with characters that I just couldn't really feel emotionally invested in, and so just didn't care too much about the story, and as a consequence just didn't feel like I really understand this period of history or this place any better. And so it's such a like sharp contrast to the joint winners last year of Demon Copperhead and Hernan Diaz's novel Trust. I suddenly forgot what it is, but both of those novels I thought were great, both in their style and their structure and the stories they told and the things they revealed about history. I mean, Trust, looking at a century past of history, and Demon Copperhead in more recent history, and an issue in a plight that is on America that has experienced due to a drug crisis, and the way those novels revealed things about those aspects of American life, I thought was really impactful, and Demon Copperhead in particular, like using as like a literary device of Dickens, but bringing it into a modern context and using a similar storyline. And so I feel like with Jayne and Phillips, she was really drawing upon a lot of literary history as well, but the way she employed it in this story just didn't really come together or feel as effective to me. And so I've been trying to go and find from the actual Pulitzer Prize itself of why this was declared the winner this year. And I haven't really been able to find very much except for the statement of when the winner was announced, of calling it a beautifully rendered novel and then describing the plot of the book. And that's kind of all that they said about it. And I don't know if the prize or the judges of it have commented any more about why they think it's such a great book, but I really want to hear from them because I just don't agree that it's a beautifully rendered novel. I think it's quite like it's quite clunky and really obvious, a lot of the things that she does in this book. So those are my thoughts about this year's Pulitzer Prize for Fiction winner. Yeah, quite a disappointment. But I'd love to hear from you. If you have read this book, especially if you had a positive reaction to it, please let me know what you thought was so strong about this novel, because I'd really love to hear other opinions about it and to really understand, like, why it's considered so great, because I'm quite confused by it, but also, if you're interested in reading it now, and if you do go and read it, please let me know what you think below, and what you think of this year's winner in general. I mean, there's also the shortlisted books, Wednesday's Child by Yi-Yun Lee, and Same Bed, Different Dreams by Ed Park, which are both books that I'm really interested in reading. I've read a number of books by Yi-Yun Lee in the past and really appreciated and enjoyed them. And I remember at the end of last year reading about this novel by Ed Park. It was listed in some of the best books of the year of lists, and thought it sounded really interesting. And also, as a sideline of looking at past winners, it just feels, I mean, I know this is just another like coincidence, like in the many ridiculous coincidences which occur in this novel, but the 2021 winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction was The Night Watch Men by Louise Erdrich, and it just feels a bit tacky to then like have a winner just a few years later called Night Watch. That's so similar in name, and I know that is just a total coincidence and doesn't really say anything and doesn't matter. But yeah, just like looking at the lists of winners and past winners, hitting those two books, I think is always going to feel a bit ridiculous because they're so similar in their titles and their names. But anyway, that's a very silly sideline. But yeah, let me know what you think of this book. And we'll just have to see what happens next year with the Pulitzer Prize and whether it'll still be worth following. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.